Time is 7 and I welcome you all, heartfelt and very warm welcome to everyone here. My name is Simon Bustamante. I'm the seminar coordinator and member of the board of Svenska Sällskapet för filosofisk praxis, or in Swedish, or in English, sorry, the Swedish Association for Philosophical Practice. We are a non-profit association promoting the practice of philosophical dialogue in Swedish society, and our goal is to take philosophy out of a strictly academic setting and into everyday life. And the society has been around for more than 10 years. I think last year was our 10-year anniversary. One way to do this, to achieve our goal, is through book seminars like this one. And today's guest is Roger Sutcliffe, a British expert on P4C, or philosophy for children. And he's going to talk about his new book, Thinking A to Z. It's a practical framework and guide for developing metacognition, which can be defined as an awareness of how one's thinking works or goes. So these tools in this book can be used for better thinking in general, and of course for philosophical thinking. So without further ado, please take it away, Roger.
Thank you, Simon. And what a pleasure to be here. I had the pleasure of Tulsa's company a little while back, and between us we cooked up the idea that there might be more of you interested, and it's a pleasure to see Swedish colleagues. It's a long time since I was in Sweden. I went there on holiday when I was about 14, but that's past history. I'm going to get straight on then with the presentation. And thinking moves A to Z, as you call it, A to Z in English pronunciation, that's fine, whichever, is 26 moves. And I can't possibly cover all 26 in the next 45 minutes. So my plan is to give you a broad overview, then to look in detail at half a dozen or so of the moves, and then to present the whole picture so that you go away with the sense of, ah, yes, this is a complete thing. Okay, we call it a scheme for teaching and managing thinking. Managing your own thinking. We claim that this A to Z makes metacognition simple. I've yet to prove that to you, but my claim is it's stunningly simple, but remarkably rich. So let's see if I can justify that. We're going to start, though, with a why question. Why is this notion of metacognition all the buzz, at least in the English-speaking world, and I suspect in your world as well? Can I just get a nod if you have heard of it and you're thinking, oh yeah, this is something I need to know more about? Well, Tulsa, anyway, I can't see everyone's face. Okay, well, let's look at it from this moment an English perspective. And there's a research foundation in the UK called the Education Endowment Foundation, which finances research into all manner of interventions in teaching and learning. And it recently promoted metacognition and self-regulation, which we'll look at in a moment, to be effectively the most impactful intervention that a teacher can make. Metacognitive approaches, it says, are powerful levers for boosting learning. There's a lot of evidence that that is the case, and their sums, and I'm a little skeptical about this, whether it can really be measured, but they reckon that it results, when done well, in a gain of 7 months of learning within a year. So over a half a year extra learning, if that's measurable. But certainly this looks interesting, and I hope that in your own way you recognize that this is an important area. Okay, so let's go back to basics. Simon's given an account of metacognition, actually a pretty good account, if I might say so. But there is a loose definition which has a certain value. Let's look at it now. In English, at any rate, people often define it as thinking about your thinking. And that's fine, but especially if you're deeply into linguistic philosophy, you might recognize that there's an ambiguity about this, at least in English there is, because the second use of thinking could be verbal, that is to say, I'm doing some thinking about it, and so you're thinking about the action of thinking, but it could be just what you're thinking. So in English, we might say, here's my thinking about it, and that's what you're thinking, not how you're thinking. Can I just again ask for nods? Is that distinction clear to you all? And if it's clear, then as philosophers, some of you, all of us maybe, we think, well, maybe that should be made clear as a distinction. We shouldn't confuse these. And actually, if we go to a more precise definition, here's from the Oxford English Dictionary, we get it absolutely clear that metacognition, properly speaking, is awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes, not the content of your thinking, but the process of your thinking. Well, let's settle for that for the moment, for metacognition. And then there's this other dimension, which is called self-regulation in English. Matter of fact, I prefer a different term. Some people translate it as self-control, regulating, controlling yourself. But that sounds to me a bit inhibiting potentially. So I prefer more positively self-management. That is to say the management of one's thinking, but also the management of one's feeling, because the two no doubt are intertwined. And through that, the management of one's acting. So self-regulation covers a bigger range in a sense. Metacognition is thinking about your thought processes, leads into the notion that through thinking about your thought processes, you can develop and manage your own feelings, your own actions. Okay, well, that sounds really big and important, especially in the educational field. We need students who are thoughtful and self-managing. Okay, back to the Education Endowment Foundation. Repeated the slide, metacognitive approaches are powerful levers for boosting learning. But in the very same report from 3-4 years ago, it said, but it can be difficult to give concrete examples of what metacognitive knowledge and skills actually look like. Well, that's a bit of a downer, really, isn't it? It says it's important, and then it says you can't actually find very many concrete examples. Well, actually, I beg to differ. Here's a book. I thoroughly recommend it, but it's an academic study in English and not everybody's cup of tea. It's published out of Durham University about 12 years ago. And it's called Frameworks for Thinking. And it looks at 42 different frameworks, essentially analyses of thinking and how we can operate as thinking beings. I'm not going to go into 42 different frameworks now, you'll be relieved to hear. I'll just mention a couple in a moment. But what the Endowment Foundation says in general is that the approaches usually focus on teaching pupils specific strategies to set goals and monitor and evaluate their own academic development in relation to particular learning tasks and activities. And I guess if we just focus on that, whether we're educators, teacher educators, even just parents, we want our young people to have a clear set of goals, to try to monitor what they're doing and assess their own progress, as well as rely on teachers' reports and so on. So that's the overall position. goal setting, monitoring, and evaluating. But then it says in more detail, covering all aspects of thinking, from basic skills such as recall to more complex thinking such as evaluation and synthesis. Now, I've highlighted those in green because I have a feeling, but it might not work in Swedish, that might ring some bells with you. That might remind you of something. Is there anybody who recognizes the words recall, evaluation, and synthesis? This is where I need your help, Simon.
Well, yeah, at least I do, and I think a lot of us do.
Okay, well, could you speak for others here and just mention what you think it is? It's almost certainly what I was expecting, but I'll play it by ear.
Basic skills such as recall. Recall is having that skill from beforehand and just bringing it again. And then evaluation is analyzing or seeing it from different perspectives. And synthesizing, synthesis is taking two concepts and forging them into one, I think, or maybe two opposing concepts, perhaps.
It could be at a very complex level. Yes, it talks about complex thinking here. You're right. Yeah, absolutely. You've explained it really well. And there is effectively a particular framework that this references, and it may ring bells with some of you, is Bloom's taxonomy. Again, I'm not sure if this is widely known in Sweden. Yay or nay?
In universities, it's widely used.
Ah, okay. Well, thank you for that, Eva.
Yes,
yeah,
and in lower education as well. At
okay, yeah,
the gymnasium or high school, definitely
in high school. Yeah. I thought it might have filtered through, and it's filtered through into, you know, beyond the country that it originated from, which is the United States. It's 60 years old now, and it's a very famous framework for thinking. And I've actually recommended it in the past. I think it has its merits, but I also think it has its issues, and I'll deal with those briefly in a moment. But in the English-speaking world, it is probably the most widely used framework for thinking. And you can see the highlights in green again. Remember is recall, evaluate, and synthesis is a technical word for creating. And that's the word that nowadays is in general use, creating ideas, generating, and so on. Okay, now, as I say, this is the most famous and most widely used, and to reasonably good effect, but there are some evaluations of Bloom that indicate that it isn't quite what it might hope to be. For a start, ironically, it's not so easy to remember. If you want further persuasion of that, here's the full list of thinking moves, if you like, in the Bloom taxonomy. And I reckon that there will be very few teachers or educators who themselves have learned that scheme, let alone any students. Further than that, the hierarchical structure, which goes from lower order thinking to higher order thinking, isn't so easy to understand and not even to agree with. Recall is supposed to be a lower order capacity than understanding, but there's a strong argument that you need to understand something properly to recall it. So which comes first? That's just a simple example. Now, also, it's not so easy to apply. I've never yet encountered students using it themselves to set goals, monitor, and evaluate their own thinking. And for me, perhaps one of the biggest weaknesses to the scheme is that it doesn't even cover the full range of thinking processes. For example, you can't find justifying in the scheme. if you don't believe me, I'll send you this list later and you can check it out for yourself, but you won't find it. And you won't find the most fundamental thinking move of all, which is questioning. In my opinion, if you don't have a questioning mind, you're not going to be doing active and certainly not critical thinking. So there are, if you like, lacks in the scheme. Okay, so the ideal metacognitive scheme surely would be easy to understand and to remember and to apply using Bloom's very own categories. It needs to be simple, memorable, practical, and it should also cover the full range of processes. It needs to be complete. Now, there are other schemes that look to do this job, and one of them is this one. I don't know if, again, that's well known in Sweden, habits of mind. Okay, that's another American origin. Again, I've supported in the past. It's good stuff. And I even went to a workshop by Art Costa, the originator. And that proved to be the catalyst, the beginning of my own framework, the Thinking Moves A to Z. Because at the very workshop, Costa showed this, which he called thinking verbs. Well, fair enough, they are verbs. Now, I'm going to give you a moment or so to process this. For goodness sake, don't attempt to learn it all, and you probably won't have time to critique it. But look particularly at the third column and tell me if you spot something a bit unusual or unexpected about it. So Simon, is there anyone eager to share their observation? Not yet? Tulsa, you have it. You have a go.
I'm out on a limb here, but I was wondering whether paraphrase was part of actual critical thinking. It seems to me to be repeating in other words. Yeah, okay. I don't think you're out on a limb. I think probably more to it than just repeating. I think you probably have to understand and then rephrase, but in the end, I think, you know, these are actually, personally, I think it's quite a good list. But I did have some questions, even at the time. One was, well, why these particular verbs? You'll notice that he starts with analyze and apply, which are within the Bloom framework, but then we don't have understand, we don't have evaluate, and so on. So it's a different framework. And I was beginning to say to myself, well, you know, what research has gone into this? What justification is there for listing these verbs and not others? So I was beginning to be not hypercritical, but a bit puzzled. And then actually at that moment, I can date it very well in my mind. I've got a picture of it. I began to say, well, this is interesting. He's actually put it in alphabetical order, except the third column, actually, it isn't in alphabetical order, which was the thing that sort of, you know, a bit nerdy. I thought, well, that's a bit odd, isn't it? Why has he done that? Probably just threw the words together. And fair enough, look, it was just a slide. But it made me think, well, maybe you could do it alphabetically, A to Z, with a different move, obviously, for each letter. And then could it be complete? Could it be like an A to Z? It actually took me 8 years to get a finished version. And that's what I published 3 years ago, the A to Z. And I have actually put this to several groups now, including Sophia itself, was mentioned earlier, the European Network for Philosophy for Children, etc. And I've challenged them and said, look, can you think of a move, of thinking verb, if you like, that isn't covered by the Thinking Moves A to Z? And I've got to the state of being so confident now that I'm almost offering prizes for anyone who can come up with a move that isn't in the A to Z. But it's time to look at it and see what it looks like. So let me start over, going back to the very beginning. the A and the B. And in English, okay, strictly these are not verbs. They're adverbs. Think ahead and think back. But actually, in English, you can't get much simpler. And it's nearly complete because ahead is the future, back is the past. So the only thing that's missing there is like thinking in the present. Now, to be fair, all thinking is in the present. I mean, like, if you're thinking now, right? But what you're thinking about, that can be in the future, in the past, in the present. So I'm going to tease you for a little while. If you can think of a thinking move that is thinking about the present, then when the time comes, you can reveal. But I'll reveal my version shortly. Let me just focus now, though, still on A and B. And I want to say this isn't just a list of 26 words. Fine, anyone can make a list. I make the claim that it's a very complete and simple list. But the scheme as a whole, what requires a book to explain it, is more than just a list of words. For example, each move has an icon with it to help both explain and to, if you like, enhance the learning. So we've got thinking ahead, that's sign is the picture is obvious, and thinking back, that's obvious. And what you see there is a lady signing it. Now this is again visual. Think ahead, you just go think and then point forward, or think back. Okay, and for each of the A to Z moves, there's a similar sign, and I'll show you the whole works before we finish in about 20 minutes. Okay, so there's the icon, there's the sign. In addition, each move has two key synonyms, and these are to help explain, but also to explore nuances or slightly different senses. So, for example, thinking ahead could be merely predicting. So I predict it's going to rain tomorrow or something. But it could be aiming. And that's of a different order. I mean, that's involving human agency. You think that you can affect the future by the goals or aims that you have. And it's a very important move for human beings to operate with. Okay, so we would be introducing this to youngsters. And incidentally, we have this scheme operating now from early years right the way through to sixth form, the higher level of schooling in the UK. And the synonyms are very helpful for this, because by the time they get to upper primary, even before they reach high school, you'll want them to extend the vocabulary. But the value of the A to Z is it gives you like a core concept for each of the words. So let's just practice that a little bit by showing you firstly a way in which we extend the vocabulary. So head, predict or aim. At early years level, we might use the vocabulary of looking forward. Or we might use the vocabulary of to try, because if you're trying to do something, you're aiming to do it. So that's again, thinking ahead. At a more advanced level, you might be using the vocabulary of to anticipate or to aspire. I guess that translates reasonably into Swedish, or you understand that concept of to aspire? It's a sort of hope, come, aim, and so on. Okay. Now, look, there isn't time for us to do the sort of exercises, activities that we would do in the training course itself, but I would be inviting people to come up with their own synonyms, a range of synonyms for thinking ahead, so that they can see how rich the concept is. And I'll just let you look through that slide for yourselves. I know it's in English, but I hope most of it makes sense to you. So you see, the one concept, simple as it is, thinking ahead, covers a very big range of important human thinking activities or acts. The same will go for back and for the others. But before then, let me point out that as well as these synonyms, obviously we have activities for students to practice and consciously practice making the move. Here's a little activity. Again, I think we'll just invite you to read it, not to do it, but any comments in a moment would be welcome. Okay, so it might be a 10-15 minute activity that a teacher at any level might do with their students. Does anyone want to comment? Can they see themselves doing it? Are they puzzled by it? Simon, anyone want to comment?
If anyone wants to comment, just feel free to unmute yourself and say a few words.
Yeah. No, okay. Look, I'll not test your patience with it. A point that I want to make about this is that if we're trying seriously to develop students' capacity to manage their own thinking, then the habit, I think of it as a habit of mind, of getting ready for something, thinking ahead, being a forethoughtful person, as we might say, is really important. I mean, it's important in adult life, it's important in everyday life, but it's also important for students preparing for an exam or preparing for a project or whatever. So again, this is so simple in essence, but in practice, it needs regular attention and development. So that's a simple way in which we would use the thinking moves to develop the capacity to set goals and to monitor your own activity. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to thinking back. And this, of course, is again a very fundamental move, not only in everyday life, but in classrooms. We often use it as teachers to say, well, look, have we got any prior experience here, whether it's in science or history or geography? Has anyone heard or come across X? Oh, well, tell us about it. Or what can you tell each other about it? So it's a simple move. I would often use it if I were regularly teaching now to summon up prior experience. Here's one that is more reflective. Again, I'll invite you to read the activity. We won't do it, but reflection is a vital ingredient in developing one's learning and living. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'll send Simon the PDF of the slides later. So if you like the look of that activity with your students, whatever age, you'll have it available. Try it out for yourself with them. Now, I said earlier that there's a particular move that is about thinking in the present. Does anyone have a suggestion? Shall we just wait in chat and see if anyone could think of any thinking verb that is about being present, thinking in the present? Pop it into chat if you think. So I've got one new message. Now, who's that? Yeah, mindful. Yes, being mindful. Thank you. Is it Claes? Is that how I say that? Anyway,
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Class is okay. You can call me in. Okay. Yeah, so
definitely. Now, mindful is a super word there, Claes. It is, however, descriptive of the, if you like, the habit of mind or the state of mind rather than the act of being mindful. It's a being rather than a doing, yeah? So, I like ponder. I like aware as well, Klaus, that's great. Ponder would be good, but bear in mind you can ponder in the past or over the past, can't you? or you can ponder the future as well as ponder in the present. So look, I've been teasing you, and I really wouldn't expect you, oh, that's nice, experiencing. Okay, thanks, Simon. But experience is a bit passive, like it's not something you do, it's something that's done to you. I'm teasing you a bit. Okay, look, here's the reveal. The move that is unquestionably in the present, it has to be in the present, is this one. Or in Art Costa's terms, gathering data with all your senses. So this isn't just listen, look, that's the hook on which to hang this. It could be touch, it could be feel, and so on. And look, you can imagine my excitement when I came across this notion. Now, it isn't actually in a published book, but it is attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, a number of principles for the development of a complete mind. And I thought, well, that's fantastic for the A to Z. Tell me more. Now, he didn't actually come up with an A to Z himself, but one of his principles was develop your senses, especially learn how to see. Well, you might expect that from an artist. You might have expected a musician to say, develop your senses, especially learn how to hear. And some of you would be saying, well, I know how to hear. Or I know how to see. What's the problem? Well, there's no problem. It's just that we can learn to see better, to notice better, to be better at gathering. To be honest, this is one of my weaknesses as a thinker. I live often in my mind and I'm not noticing what's going on around me or whatever. Oh, well, there you go. You can't do everything at once, but there we are. There we have it. It's a really powerful and important thinking move that we can say to children, look, just listen. And I mean, really listen, or just look. And I'm going to elaborate that in just a minute. But here's a little activity to help develop the senses. I call it use your senses, or being present, being mindful even, yeah. Why don't we do it? It's only 30 seconds long. So we'll try and be silent. I'm going to shut up and just be very aware. Okay, well, we could have some fascinating sharing there, learning about the environment in which each of us is existing and so on and so forth. Let me just focus attention on the last question here. So not the 5 standard senses, but did you notice anything other than through your 5 classic senses? Again, Simon, I'm just going to check out whether anyone's got a response to that.
I think that there might be a feeling inside, you know, of being curious, so for waiting for the next slide.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. I think that's super. That's super.
A bumblebee.
Yeah. Okay, you're spot on. There's a deeper sense, an even deeper sense of listen, look. And this is such an important slide for the purposes of understanding and ultimately implementing metacognition. So I'm going to let you read it yourself and ponder it. Okay. So I think whoever noticed something inside, this is exactly my point, yeah? And obviously thoughtful, reflective people are doing this. They're not just alert to the outside world, they're developing their own inner world, their inner life, and their inner dialogue. So it's so simple, isn't it? Look, listen, and yet the depth of it is very powerful. That's my claim. Now, I'm just going to introduce you to one more move in detail, and then I'm going to whiz through the whole sequence. Okay, so another fundamental move, and maybe it's two really, is zoom. Now, look, being slightly humorous about this, you can imagine when I set myself the task of an A to Z, the letters X, Y, and Z were going to be a bit of a problem. But fortunately, quite quickly, I hit on this one for the Z, and I thought, actually, that's great, because this is like what our human minds do. We're constantly zooming in on something, we attend to a particular conversation, and then we zoom back and we're aware of elsewhere and so on. So this one works beautifully with listen, look as a complement, okay? But notice also, I'm talking over my slide here, but it's not just that we can zoom with our senses, looking more closely at a book, listening to a particular sound, zooming out, listening to the whole picture, and so on. We can also zoom in on an idea. And in the teaching context, this could be really important. We say, hold on, let's just zoom in on this idea a minute and see if we can really understand it. And this language is so natural. I know that teachers, Maria, can I bring you in on this? It's a bit of a dirty trick, really, but you're now using some of these words in the A to Z with your sixth formers, aren't you? Do you mind saying something about it?
No, I'd be very glad to. It has really transformed my teaching. I'm trying to think of a couple of specific examples. We did a lesson on just war theory, and we looked at some case studies. And one student was getting a bit hot under the collar about how the conflict in the Gulf War had been represented. And she said, well, actually, I come from this country, and if you look at the situation at the time, America had done this and da, 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 da. And I was able to really take the heat out of that exchange by saying, oh, well done. What you're doing is you've thought back further, or you've zoomed out. And then I invited them to do the same thing with the different case studies and look at, well, where, you know, when we're taking a historical example, we're always kind of cutting it off at some point. We've cropped our example somehow. And it was a really powerful support to me to have this framework, to just be able to pinpoint exactly the kind of move that she'd made, rather than going into who's right, who's wrong, on which side. Another example, I'm trying to think if I can refer to it yet. I was asking them to rank human rights in order of importance, and one young man said, I think the right to life is the most important, just because it is. And he couldn't articulate any deeper reasoning. Another student said, I think it's the right to privacy, because if you don't have privacy, you don't know who's watching you, and then you can never feel comfortable. And with using the framework, I was able to say, oh, well done, you've negated that. You thought, what would happen if you didn't have it? And then thought ahead of the consequences. And then I went back to the first student and said, okay, what would happen if you negated and thought ahead? It said, well, if I didn't have the right to life, then I might not be alive, and none of the rights would matter. I've got so many examples of how it's really helped me with my questioning, and it's really helping the students be empowered to just reason more clearly. I'm really excited about it. I could talk a lot. Yeah, I've also just started putting together a series of lessons for our students who are doing an extended project qualification, which is different from an A-level because it's about the process. So the thinking moves are perfect for getting them to think, go meta in their thinking, and recognise what it is they're doing in their planning process. Because this is the thing they lose marks on, is they do their planning, they do their thinking and their research, but they're very poor at articulating and identifying the steps that they've taken while they've been doing that. And this gives them perfect vocabulary and reference points for just auditing, you know, what have I done here?
Very good. Thank you so much, Maria. It was a bit of a dirty trick, but I hope colleagues will pardon me for giving you first-hand experience. So you refer to the framework, Maria, and I've got 5 minutes before I open this up for questions. So I'm just going to show you the full A to Z, some of which you've referenced anyway, Maria. So for example, ordering, that's something that we would do regularly in many lessons. Weighing up, justifying, and so on and so forth. Now, look, as I say, this is just a taster. I'm not going to go through all the words with you, but I'll give you a moment to look through for yourselves. And a nice way of just trying to process this is to recognize the icons, and some of them will be more intuitive than others. So if there's an icon that you really don't understand, I'll spend a couple of minutes afterwards just trying to explain why we chose it. But for now, let's have 30 seconds or 60 seconds of just quietly processing the full A to Z. Okay, Simon, if you could just help me, does anyone have a puzzle about any of the icons, the pictograms as we sometimes call them?
Anyone? Any thoughts or questions?
In a way, I'd be pleased if they didn't. I'm just giving them the chances to say, I don't get that. What's that signify? Okay, well, look, for time's sake, I'll move on. I'll just point out that infer and justify, which are not really pictograms, they're very symbolic, are taken from mathematics or logic. The first one, infer, is the mathematical sign for therefore, a conclusion, and the other one is the reverse. It's the mathematical sign for because, or to justify. You'll notice also, incidentally, that my solution to the XY problem was to cheat with exemplify. Yeah, you spotted that. And then the Y is a very quaint, it's an old-fashioned English word, to yield. Is it known amongst colleagues here? Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like to give way. In fact, if you drive in Ireland, you'll find that their give way signs, the road signs, actually say yield, which means give way to someone else. And I've come to regard yield as my favorite move. And actually, the reason being because the world needs people to yield. It does need people to maintain and stand up for what they believe in. That's the M. But it also needs for them to say, actually, I think you're right. I yield. I accept what you're saying. And this is part of the broader education that we can induct the youngsters into and say, well, you did really well to yield there because you were so hot under the collar, to use your expression, Maria, but you yielded with such good grace. Wouldn't it be fantastic if the world had more yielders? And anyway, that's my thing. Right, now look, last thing I want to show you so that we get on to the questions and answers is this. Just to give you a flavor of the sign language. I won't show you all the A to Z, but enough to give you the flavor, and I'll send you the link to this. You can see it for yourself in your own time, but here we go. I've already done
ahead.
Think ahead.
and
ahead,
oh, she does it twice.
back,
Think back, think back.
back. Connect,
Just join things together. That's
Connect.
an important move, to connect, and then the opposite of that is
Divide.
to divide or separate.
divide. Explain,
That's a technical
explain,
sign in the deaf language, to explain.
formulate,
To think up. Well, I've got a
Formulate.
good idea.
group,
Bring things together in a group.
group. Headline,
To headline. To summarize.
headline. Infer,
To take from or tell from.
infer,
To infer. And so, okay.
justify, justify.
Oh, I meant to pause that. Let me pause that. There you go. Okay. So there you have it. That's the A to Z. I'm going to show a couple of slides at the end, but I promised 10 minutes or so for questions and answers. So I wonder if we could do this by questions in chat, Simon. It's easier for me to process it that way. So I'll shut up while people dream up some questions. Formulate some questions for me. Okay, but maybe I've stunned everyone. So stunningly simple that the, or shall I give it another few seconds, Simon? Do you think people are typing? Ah, yes. Well, we've got one from Klaus. I want to know more. Where can I buy the book? Simon, we have a plan here, don't we? Do you want to speak to it, or shall I?
Please do.
Okay, so the book won't be currently available in Sweden, but with the P4C network in New Zealand, what we did was we shipped about 20 books to a key person, and they distributed them in Sweden. And that, I think, is probably the simplest and most cost-effective way of doing it. My suggestion then, Klaus, if it's agreeable to you, is that those of you on the webinar now, if you want a copy of the book, you just let Simon know, and we'll work out how many books to post. And then, Simon, is it asking too much for you to then distribute them in Sweden?
No, not at all. And if people, I could always mail out a questionnaire, like who of the attendants are interested in the book, and then we can see how much.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, we'll process it like that then. So are you happy then, Klaus? You can speak now if you want. Okay, you don't need to. Right, now we've got Tova. Could you elaborate on the use of keyword? And is it meant to be used to summarize? You're close, but actually keyword and headline go together beautifully. Headline is summarize. Keyword is just identifying literally what we would say the keywords, and it's not put together as a summary. It's just say, oh, well, that's an important word. That's an important word. Just as if students were highlighting text, we encourage them not to highlight too many words, because then they just put yellows all over the page. What are the key words? That's the critical difference. And then, of course, they can be used to frame a summary. It's going to be a better summary if they've got the essential words. Does that work for you, Tova? Are you okay with that?
Can't see, but I'm hoping that's okay. Then we have Simon. Is the ultimate hope to have people think better, as in more creative or faster or more collaborative or other? Can you elaborate on better? Oh, well, look, I need to write a book on that, Simon. But some of the moves are more, if you like, I won't say appropriate, but more regularly used in critical thinking, critical discussion, words like justify, maintain, negate, and so on. But other moves can be grouped as more creative moves. So connect is a creative one, formulate, vary. Those are the ones that I would recommend for creative. As to faster, I'm not so sure I would either claim that or want people necessarily to think faster. In some ways, I want them to think slower, to be more conscious of their thought processes and edit them a bit better, if you like. Well, manage them. So that's my brief answer to that. Okay, now let me move on to Paul. I assume these moves can be adjusted to older students. Yeah, yes, absolutely, Paul. That's exactly the point of the synonyms. We provide some basic vocabulary here, but we absolutely encourage for teachers to use more elaborate vocabulary. When I say more elaborate, more sophisticated vocabulary, but themselves be aware that even something like, I'll use an example for mathematics, to extrapolate is to infer or to predict beyond, or to interpolate is to infer what's in between, if you like. So you could explain these more sophisticated language by reference to the basic vocabulary, which hopefully they'll already have learned by the time they reach secondary or high school. And then you're refining their thinking, but they've got a solid basis rather than thinking, oh gosh, is that a whole new thought? Well, it's sophisticated, it's context-based, but it's not like you haven't done that sort of thing before. Right, now I'm going to, oh look, Klaus is answering the question already. I'm using some of the moves with students, and Maria, you've heard from her as well. So definitely it can and I think should be used with older students. Have you used the method on adults? Yes, Annika, this has been used by a pretty forward-thinking, good word there, a teacher educator at Kiel University, who's a teacher educator training teachers for the future. And she uses it partly so that they will introduce the thinking moves to their students, but partly because she has recognized that they can plan their lessons better through the use of the thinking moves. They know what thinking they want the students to do because they've got a label for it. It's not just sort of vague, oh, well, I want them to, not sure. Well, here's the big task, break it down. We want them to do this, we want them to do that, and they'll end up doing that. So definitely. And just another point, which isn't simply about the education context, but these are moves for life. One of the real beauties of this is none of these moves is like a wholly new thing that you have to learn about. Everybody already uses pretty much every one of these thinking moves without realizing it, or only occasionally realizing it. And what the moves does is it gives them a vocabulary to say, well, what I need to do is this, or what I've just been doing is this. And what I would like to do is this, this, and this. And it's just a very simple and practical vocabulary. But because it's complete, you can do everything with it. Sorry, I'm getting too excited here. Too excited. Let me go back to chat. See if there's anything else here just before we finish. And I see a shamelessly from different people. See which, yeah, absolutely. So I think you'll find, even within the context of P4C, and I say even, I mean, it's an important context, of course, but we've already got people in Holland and in Jakarta using the moves specifically to assist and develop the thinking in P4C, because P4C often claims that it helps students think about their thinking. But take care, I almost end where I began. That could be just thinking about what other people are thinking. That's thinking about thinking, but it's not metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about how you are thinking. And so we have a system in the P4C that I do called calling your shots. And what that is before you say something in an inquiry, you define what you're going to do. So at the simplest, you're probably familiar with this, students already say, I agree with X because, and so they say in advance what they're going to do. They're going to agree or they're going to disagree. But what they can do now is say, I'd like to justify what I've just said, or I'd like to question what so-and-so has just said, or I'd like to test. I'm not sure whether this is true. So can we test this claim? And so the students just become much more aware of the process, not just of their thinking, but the process of inquiry. Now, I'm thinking Tulsa wants to say something.
I thought that was a request if we could test your claim, and I was going to second it.
Oh, very good. Okay, thank you for that.
So I'm just thinking about board meetings, for example, if you could, or any kind of meeting.
Yeah,
if you could state beforehand what you were about to say, even just to group it in comment or question or argument, and against or for what. So that would cut our meeting times down to like 1/4, I think.
Well, it would certainly be more precise, wouldn't it? More to the point, absolutely. Now, folk, I'm coming up for the hour, and I hope I've done at least what you were hoping and maybe expecting.
And we had one last question from Paul. Metacognition is thinking about how you're thinking and what you're thinking. True?
Okay. Well, I think in the sense that if it's what you're thinking, then that could be counted as metacognition because you're effectively testing your own ideas. Does that make sense? You're aware of what you're thinking, and even before you say it, you might be thinking, is that the right thing to say? To be honest, I do a lot of that when I'm thinking of saying something to my wife and then thinking, perhaps I shouldn't say that. No, I'm teasing, really. But so, Paul, yes, I think in that sense, you can say it's thinking about what you're thinking as well as how you're thinking. But when you're thinking about what other people are thinking, personally, I don't see that as metacognition. I think that is thinking, for sure, and an important sort of thinking. It's critical thinking, but it's not thinking about your own thought processes or thoughts. I hope I've dealt with that. Look, if you want to carry on any of this conversation, Simon has my email. You're very welcome to contact me and take it further. And indeed, I sort of welcome this. If any of you do want to go further with this privately or collectively, you know, I'm very open to suggestions and invitations.
Thank you so much, Roger, for taking your time to deliver this very, very interesting talk. And thanks to all of you who attended and for your participation and questions. Thank you, everyone.